using remote simultaneous interpretation. I kindly ask participants to be mindful of the additional difficulties experienced by interpreters when working remotely and to deliver statements at a normal speaking speed. I apologize in advance for any technical difficulties that we may encounter during our virtual meetings. Madam Deputy Secretary General, Ms. Amina Mohamed, Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly, Ms. Jayatma Wikramanayake, UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, youth representatives, and the global youth, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for me to warmly welcome you all to the 2022 ECOSOC Youth Forum, which is being held under the theme of COVID-19 recovery, youth taking action for a sustainable future. This theme is very timely as it offers the youth a unique opportunity to contribute to the ongoing discussions on sustainable, inclusive, and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. The ECOSOC Youth Forum is a significant platform that promotes the equal participation and engagement of the global youth in the work of the United Nations. Given its significance, the outcomes of the Youth Forum feed into the high-level political forum on sustainable development, the HLPF, which reviews and monitors the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Excellencies, youth representatives, ladies and gentlemen, once again, we are convening this forum when the world is still grappling from the COVID-19 pandemic. As you may recall, we celebrated the historic 10th anniversary of the forum last year, when the world was just beginning to emerge from a period of uncertainty and fear. It was also a time when COVID-19 vaccines and the treatments were developed and being rolled out. We were all hopeful then, as we remain so today. But while cooperation in achieving scientific progress yielded a lightning speed development of COVID-19 vaccines, the virus remains to be fully conquered. We continue to face the threat of new variants, and yet we know through science what to do. The most immediate and urgent task now is to address the inequalities or iniquities across the globe that have vividly been exposed by the pandemic itself, which has also disproportionately affected the youth through the unprecedented disruptions in education and the labor market. Excellencies, youth representatives, ladies and gentlemen, in line with this year's theme, I strongly encourage the youth to look at the future with hope and identify concrete actions that are forward-looking to address their challenges and fast-track implementation of the 2030 Agenda, especially youth-related sustainable development goals. Above all, the youth should consider and contribute to the 5 SDGs that will be reviewed in depth at the 2022 HLPF in July, namely SDG 4 on quality education, SDG 5 on gender equality, SDG 14 on life below water, SDG 15 on life on land, and SDG 17 on partnerships for the goals. As President of ECOSOC, I consider the following 6 actions as critical for COVID-19 recovery. First, as an immediate step, vaccines against COVID-19 must be made available to everyone, everywhere, as a global public good without any discrimination. The low vaccination rates in developing countries, particularly in Africa, remains a matter of grave concern. Second, we need stronger health and social protection systems, as well as infrastructure to defeat the pandemic and build necessary resilience to prevent and be able to respond much better to similar or even worse future pandemics. Third, we need to address rising food insecurity and higher energy prices. Along with the pandemic, the worsening food insecurity is pushing more people deeper into hunger and poverty, thus exacerbating social and political instability around the world. Fourth, we need greater investment in technology so that young people, particularly the poorest and the most vulnerable, can take advantage of opportunities offered by digitalization. This requires proper investment in education and other critical services, such as health. The Transforming Education Summit, which will take place in September, provides an ideal opportunity to discuss this challenge. Mobilizing actions for the future of education is crucial in post-COVID-19 recovery. Fifth, we need to foster peaceful, just, and inclusive societies, which are free from fear and violence. Conflict and war have the most destructive impacts in the future of young people. Lastly, we need sound and transformative policies and strategies that will accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the achievement of the SDGs to ensure a sustainable and inclusive recovery. Observations that emerged from the second Global Voluntary National Reviews webinar, which was held last week in Gaborone, Botswana, my own country, show that the recovery policies and strategies implemented by many countries are contributing to the achievement of the SDGs. Dear young representatives, your continued advocacy and activism have helped to keep us focused on the Sustainable Development Goals and to simultaneously pay equal attention to the climate change crisis and COVID-19 pandemic. You have been and you continue to be at the forefront of the global movement for more decisive action on climate change. I'm counting on your continued support to build a truly global coalition committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. This is the year to walk the talk. At the UN Climate Change Conference, COP27, in November 2022 in Egypt, needs to be a key milestone in delivering impactful outcomes for our planet and people. We at ECOSOC remain resolute to offer guidance to all member states and their leaders to assist in designing sound and evidence-based policies that provide for decent work and green jobs for the youth. Excellencies, dear friends, as the world continues to grapple with the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic and other global challenges, I strongly believe that the Sustainable Development Goals offer a roadmap to build sustainable, inclusive, and thriving societies and reinvigorate global solidarity for the 21st century. Now more than ever, a sustainable future can only be built through youth empowerment and meaningful engagement with them. You legitimately deserve to have a seat at the table when decisions about your future are being made. This is why we meet during these 2 days of the Youth Forum, convened under the auspices of the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC. I therefore look forward to hearing your bold and innovative ideas and proposals on how to take on COVID-19 recovery, empowerment of women and girls, transforming education, protecting our oceans, safeguarding our natural ecosystems, and financing your own future to the next level. As I conclude, it is particularly pleasing to note your participation in such high numbers at this year's ECOSOC Youth Forum. I am encouraged that the numbers keep rising at each forum, compared also with the last count in 2021, which was 19,000 participants. This demonstrates the value you attach to this important forum. I thank you for your kind attention. I will now invite the forum to hear a statement by the President of the 76th session of the General Assembly, His Excellency Abdullah Shahid.
Excellencies, dear friends, let me be brief. The future of policymaking, of multilateralism, and of global cooperation will be determined by what young people make of it. If we aim to maintain our multilateral system and strengthen and revitalize it, then we must aim to engage and empower those who will inherit it. As President of the United Nations General Assembly, I have one term to serve in office, one calendar year. I'm already reminded each day of how quickly that year is passing. Like most presidents, I hope to leave a legacy, to leave a mark on the institution that I care so deeply for. I've learned quickly that it is the people you inspire and influence who will carry that legacy forward. I'm pleased that during my presidency, I've been able to launch the PGA Fellowship for Hope. Through this program, 8 young diplomats are currently working and learning through the Office of the President. They are fully immersed in the workings of the United Nations and the General Assembly. It is my hope that this fellowship, which specifically targets young people from less represented countries, will continue in the years to come, that it will result in our recommitment to multilateralism. Excellencies, dear friends, today we are confronted with multiple crises: climate change, biodiversity loss, inequality, COVID-19, conflict. If we are to meaningfully make progress on any of these issues, and progress that is sustainable, that endures for decades to come, then youth must be part of that process. They must own it. Young people are our best hope for tackling the challenges facing the world and in pursuing success on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. From the solutions they offered during the COVID-19 pandemic to the many on the front lines of the climate action, young people are demonstrating that they have the solutions and that the will to fight for the planet that they will inhabit and the world that they will inherit. I've been honored to meet several of these young champions. I welcome the proposals in the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report, which specifically aims to empower youth in a UN 2.0. I was pleased to help facilitate Member States' discussion. It is now on all of us to take these forward. Dear friends, the ECOSOC Youth Forum is a unique opportunity to bring together youth representatives, governments, and the United Nations system to benefit from the perspectives of young people in our collective pursuit of sustainable development. Such intergenerational conversations should be routine, not only here in the United Nations, but across the globe as a regular feature of consultations for policy making and decision making at the global, regional, national, and local levels. I commend you for joining today and thank you for the opportunity to contribute.
I thank the President of the General Assembly for his statement. The forum will now hold a moderated conversation on youth taking action for a sustainable future. And it is my pleasure to welcome the following distinguished guest speakers. Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Ms. Jayatma Wikramanayake, United Nations Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, Ms. Chido Mbemba, African Union's Youth Envoy, and Ms. Marinelle Obaldo, Climate Justice Advocate. I also welcome Mr. Sherwin Bryce Peace, Bureau Chief and Correspondent of the South African Broadcasting Corporation at the United Nations headquarters, who will be the moderator of this interactive dialogue, and I now invite him to conduct the discussions.
And I certainly thank the President of ECOSOC and the President of the General Assembly and welcome you, the audience, to this interactive discussion on COVID-19 recovery, youth taking action for a sustainable future. And how fitting to be in this magnificent SDG studio located within UN headquarters here in New York. My name is Sherwin Bryce-Pease from the South African Broadcasting Corporation. Our guests have been introduced by the President, so let's get into it. Deputy Secretary General. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has repeatedly emphasized the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on young people, which have been especially heartbreaking. And he also believes young people have a central role to play in any recovery. How does the United Nations seek to empower young people to be able to do just that?
Thank you, Sherwin. Delighted to be with you and with the President of ECOSOC and our young people. Great question. First, I think acknowledging that the crisis has gone from the climate to COVID, and now we have a war in Ukraine, and all of those are culminating in many losses: education, employment. And I think perhaps one of the invisible clouds that we see for young people has been mental health as well. I think if we take into cognizance what they are experiencing, how to come out of that, they must be up front and center of the Build Back Better. You hear it, Build Back Better, Build Back with everyone. And in doing that, what are the opportunities? And that really starts at the country level. Not to add on youth, but that when we are creating and designing the plans for getting back to a better place, energy transitions, transitions that will be digital to close that divide. Whatever it is, the program that is framed around the SDGs, we need to see that young people are included. Now, I think my greatest fear is that we're not going to sound like a broken record. So we are constantly saying what we need to do. We need to get to the implementation.
These days, it's a broken iPod or an iPad or something like
that.
Well,
absolutely, absolutely. Okay, now you know my age. Now you know my age. But absolutely, and I think that this is where we have to be really serious about it. Not just invite youth to the table. It's really about designing the programs, even the agenda that you want to have a discussion around how you move forward. It's not to be invited to the table. It's to be part of the design that is put on the table that we want to have a discussion with. So that whole co-creation piece, how do we do it with them?
I mean, this is what Our Common Agenda report, quoting the SG, says. It's time to find ways to give more weight to young people's collective interests and to make our systems work to safeguard their futures. What is the relationship between that statement and the decision-making we are seeking from these young people? I mean, are they in the boardrooms? Are they in cabinets? Are they in the hierarchy of the United Nations? I mean, what does that really mean in practice?
I think there is a different strokes, different folks, right? It just depends where you are at that point in time. If we are saying that all young people should become presidents and ministers overnight, then I think we don't do justice to them. You've got to travel that path. You've got to experience the responsibilities and the policy making and its implementation until you get to a point where we should have younger leaders. We should have younger decision makers. But I think we need to explain that path. And we need to have them in every step of the way. And I don't see that so much. It's always about a quota for youth, a quota for women. But this is something that should be an integral part of everyone around the table. You need to look around the table and say, well, how many young people have we got in decision making today? How many in my office? How many are actually part of perhaps the bureaucracy? If I look to see what we were trying to do here in the UN by making it younger, the first thing that we have to think about is that how do we bring in not that the average age in the Secretariat is 45 years old, but it is 25 years old. And then you have a career that you start in one place and you get to another. So, I mean, I know that there is a lot of anxiety about everything's got to happen today. And a young person stands at the bottom of a hill and looks up the top. And what you want to do is press the button on your iPad and get there. No, it's a journey. And that journey in itself, we have to ensure that they are part of it, and that they're not just picked up halfway along because it's a good thing to do and to tick the box, we've got youth. And I think they have to have a say too in how this should happen. We need to hear from them, which is what I'm hoping to do today.
Let's do right that. Yeah. Let's just do that. Jayatma Wickramanayake, the UN Secretary General's envoy on youth, you have said of this youth forum that it provides a platform to hold decision makers accountable for their actions, which will continue to impact generations for years to come, and to advocate for more young people to be represented where those decisions are being made. I get the activism side of things where young people continue to be prolific, but in the decision-making bodies, I don't see enough young people there, do you?
Thank you very much, Sherwin, for the question, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Let me also first thank the President of ECOSOC for convening this meeting. And it's 11 years since this forum began, Sherwin, as you said, the UN creating this platform for young people to hold decision makers accountable for implementing their SDGs and doing that in partnership with young people. 11 years later, we've grown so much, we've achieved so much, but as you rightly pointed out, the lack of young people in decision making is an ongoing problem. Despite being disproportionately affected by the decisions that are made today and being those who will inherit the consequences of these decisions, they are still often excluded and sidelined from decision making, as the Deputy Secretary General just mentioned. For an example, there's 1.2 billion young people in the world today in numbers, but only less than 3% of the world's parliamentarians are under the age of 30. So as the DSG said, if we want more young people to be, say, presidents and prime ministers, we first need to get them into the parliaments, into the decision-making bodies at the municipal level, at the regional level. And still there are so many structural, legal, financial barriers and stereotypes that stop them from achieving that. But it's also important not just to call for young people in leadership, but to really see if we are fulfilling the preconditions to empower them to grab those leadership positions when they are available or claim that space. Currently, 258 million children and young people in the world do not have access to education. 42% of all forcibly displaced people are under the age of 18. And we are talking about digital learning, iPods and iPads, but 2.2 billion children and young people around the world do not have an internet connection at home. So when we speak about young people in decision making, we have to ensure that those preconditions are met. They are able to realize their basic and fundamental rights, education, health, access to services, but also that we include them in all their diversity. Young refugees, young women and girls, disabled youth, young indigenous people, young LGBTIQ people. So in that spirit, I believe the ECOSOC Youth Forum is an inclusive space that brings together member states and young people, UN and stakeholders to promote meaningful, diverse and effective engagement to review the progress on the SDGs as it relates to the young people. So over the next 2 days, we have the opportunity to hold decision makers accountable for their actions and advocate for more young people to be represented where decisions are being made. And I really look forward to our conversations in the next 2 days, particularly also on the ideas outlined in the Our Common Agenda of the Secretary General, which really tries to put the wind under the wings of the SDGs, particularly in terms of deepening the solidarity with young people and future generations.
Let's go to the African Union's Youth Envoy, Chido Mpemba. Part of your mandate is to encourage AU member states to define and implement national, regional and continental policies on youth and to advocate for better youth mainstreaming in decision-making, right? That's the theme for the opening segment here, decision-making. What does that look like in real life from where you sit, right? When the rubber hits the road. And where do you see gaps that must be urgently addressed?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, it's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward, as we discuss in the next 2 days. I think this is an important time to make sure that young people are involved when it comes to, economic development and social development, and how we move forward in playing part in terms of, decision-making structures. Well, when we look at the African Union and my role in particular, we have the African Union Youth Charter. And this is a governing policy for member states in relation to the development of youth. And so we're at a place where we're not starting from scratch, but rather we need to keep on working towards the realization of the strategic articles enshrined in the Charter, as originally adopted and endorsed by the heads of government at their meeting, which happened in July 2006. The Youth Charter provides a strategic framework for youth empowerment and development activities at the continental, regional, and national levels across Africa. And it addresses key issues affecting youth, especially looking at employment. At the moment, we have almost 10 million young people entering the job market each and every year, but only 3 million jobs that are available. So that is very important for us to be looking into. And in addition to this, sustainable livelihoods, education, skills development, also identifying where we have skills gaps, health, youth participation, national youth policy, peace and security as well, which is very important, and law enforcement including youth in the diaspora. And this is what's outlined in the African Youth Charter. But where we have a gap is in the ratification of this charter in terms of member states and holding them accountable when it comes to the adoption of the Youth Charter and ensure its full implementation at member state level. And I think coming into this role, the challenge that we're faced with is making sure that young people are involved in the decision-making processes at policy level, at decision-making level. And in as much as I represent the young people and form part of this constituent, I believe that we need to have more voices included at decision-making level, even as we're implementing the Youth Charter. Another example is when it comes to at member state level. At the moment, we have 4 youth advisors, youth presidential advisors that have been appointed, in some member states. But if we look at that as a best practice, we could look at having, each member state appointing a youth advisor, a youth presidential advisor, and looking into how we can ratify the Youth Charter and make sure that it's implemented in its full totality. And this will then come to part in terms of including young people in the decision-making, ensuring that they're also part of the governance structures, not just at the African Union, but at member state level as well.
Chido, I want to high-five you. I also have that African Development Bank, those figures in front of me. Between 10 and 12 million youth enter the workforce in Africa every year, and only 3 million formal jobs are created annually. We're going to do a round on unemployment in a second, but I want to bring in Marinelle Ubaldo, a climate justice advocate. As an advocate for climate justice and the environment, one of the key sustainable development pillars of the United Nations, what do you want leaders in power to know about the future that you want?
Thank you so much for that question, and I am very, very happy to be here. And thank you for organizing this event. I want a future. I am envisioning a future where I am not afraid to dream, a future that would actually enable me to hone my potentials, and a future that would let me reach my goals and aspirations in life. Also, a future where I am not afraid to live, a future that is safe and far from harms and adverse impacts of the climate crisis. As we all know, the IPCC report has recently released the final part of the 6th assessment, which actually sets out the actions that we urgently need in order to curb climate destruction. So our window for action is shrinking. And as someone from the Philippines, I am very, very afraid that my community will not be where it is now in 2050. So I want a future that I could see my children still eating the fresh fish that I eat now, enjoying the environment that I am enjoying now, and enjoying the human rights that I am enjoying now, because climate change is the greatest threat to human rights.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and I think you talk about the blueprint that is the United Nations, and that's called the SDGs, right? You talk about quality education. You want a world where there's gender equality, right? Protecting our girls and our women in particular. If you look at the impacts, the disproportionate impacts that the war in Ukraine is having on just that demographic, it really speaks to what we are trying to do at the United Nations. You talk about protecting our oceans, sustainable future on land, a quality, universal healthcare. If COVID has taught us one thing, it's that. Let's get to the conversation on unemployment. If you just take Africa as a continent as an example, the African Development Bank, DSG, talks about 10 to 12 million youth entering the workforce every year, and they're only creating 3 million jobs. And these, when these external shocks like COVID happen, when the external shocks like Ukraine happen, things quickly get worse, right? So how are we building the resilience? How are we creating these jobs? How are we, preparing for the next big shock that's coming in terms of unemployment in that context?
I think first things first, the world of work is going to change dramatically. And so to just say I want 3 or 10 million more formal jobs is not the way to go. That's doing more of the same.
Yeah.
And I think what we're seeing right now is a new era where young people are able to find a living if there's a conducive environment, to become employers themselves and not just the employed. And so I think that governments have to create that environment in these incredible transitions that we've got as part of the climate action, to see young people much more involved with the innovation that they bring. But with all of this, they're going to need skill sets. They're going to need a better education system. And so the Secretary General's laid out as part of the Common Agenda, the first activity, the transforming education. And in that transforming education, for me, it is about how do young people envisage the skill sets that they will need for the workplace of tomorrow, which starts today. And already we've seen it.
They need to be part of shaping that
curricula,
right?
They need to be part of shaping it. This is going to be a discussion across all regions, in all countries. And we need to find a way that young people's voices, representation at the global level and the local level, meet each other to shape that. And that will make a difference to the world tomorrow. I mean, I hear of digital nomads today, and I'm thinking, what on earth is that? This is young people working wherever, however. They may not want a 5-day, 40-hour week. They may go back to 3. The world they want is the one with a better quality life, and not just what I want. It's what I need and what I aspire. And as the young lady said, I want to live in a world without fear. I want to be able to dream. So what is the education that we need for that? And I think a lot of it has to be thought through, and that discussion had at the country level. I'll say one other thing. I think that we also need to see with the representation of young people, the vast majority do not have. And the young people that we speak to today are privileged. They've had an education, they're representing. How do we make the connection between the two to get the movements that we need in countries and institutions like ours? So when you say you want a youth representative or a special advisor to the president, there's sufficient momentum in a country for a president, when they go into the election, they know that that's the first promise that they make. When they get into office, they take the young people who were with them on campaign into office to help shape the future. So employment is going to come from a different set of inputs than we have today. And perhaps maybe one last thing to say is that young people holding leaders to account requires for us to strengthen institutions and to get the data and the metrics right, so that you hold ministers accountable, not a youth minister. In every ministry or sector of an economy, we ought to be asking them, what have you delivered for young people, for women, and where's the metrics for that?
You talk about the different sectors. This is a great segue into my next. You talked about sort of governments talk, DSG, about they create an enabling environment for the private sector to flourish. So let me bring in Jayatma Wickramanayake, the UN SDGs Youth Envoy. In terms, we talk a lot about presidential actions and youth advisors and that kind of stuff. What's the role of the private sector here?
I think the private sector has a huge role to play. Just adding to what DSG said, when I speak to young people around the world in my role as the envoy on youth, young people do not only say that we want any job. They say we want decent jobs. No one wants to work in a coal mine. Young people are really looking for the creation of greener jobs.
They better not want to. They better not want to.
They really want cleaner and greener jobs going into the future. They don't want to make a living out of destroying our planet, out of destroying our own health. So the renewable energy sector, for an example, has the potential of creating up to 40 million jobs by 2030. And we are still not realizing that potential. So there is a way, really, through the skills that we give to the young people through the education systems, but also through sustainable partnerships, by transforming not only the corporate social responsibility or the social projects of the private sector companies, but transforming the business model of the private sector to create sustainable, greener jobs for young people that can be a solution for both of these issues.
Chido, I want to bring you back because you created this discussion. I mean, what's your advice to governments, the private sector, just given how massive the youth unemployment situation in Africa is in particular? I mean, in South Africa alone, we're talking about people in that demographic at around 65% unemployed, and I'm sure that's echoed in different countries around the world. What are the solutions here?
I think, first of all, we need to appreciate that not all size fits all. And they need to be personalized when it comes to community level, national level. And I think the UN Deputy Secretary General said it right to say that we need to ensure that there's inclusion of everyone as well. Because we have people in non-urban areas that might not even have access, when it comes to digital innovation or digital access, when we're talking about these jobs or opportunities for growth. So we need to start looking at that model to say, how do we include everyone? And as we include everyone, how do we ensure that it's personalized according to each and every member state and based on the challenges that they're faced with, as well as opportunities? For example, when you look at Africa, we're rich in minerals and agriculture. And how do we ensure that this is accessible to young people first of all. Secondly, how to ensure that we have even access available to funding for young people that are looking to start their own enterprises. And in addition to this, how to ensure that we create a market for the young people. So I think it has to do with the value chain that will add value throughout the process. And it will include everyone, including the private sector, the government sector, the young people themselves, and ensuring that that access is available and that no one is left behind, being an overall model that we use.
Let me bring in Marinelle Ubaldo, just in terms of the climate space, which you are most familiar with. Do you see enough youth representatives in decision-making roles? I mean, you know, it's one thing to be protesting on a street or to sit outside your parliament during your lunch break away from school. But are you seeing the type of engagement we need at the top echelons of climate justice?
A lot of youth are actually being used as tokens, and that is true even in the Philippines and also in the international level. And I have attended a lot of conferences. They have been trying to invite us to get quote unquote our take on the issue and to say that they're actually listening to us. But on the decision-making table, we are not part of that. So they just want us to be there to say that they are actually listening to us, but we don't see ourselves in the decision-making table, and even our demands are not even on the final paper of a conference or in a decision-making event. So I felt like I am used at some point, because I am always invited to tell a sad story because I am a Super Typhoon Haiyan survivor. I have seen the worst impact of the climate crisis, and we have lost lives. We have lost our relatives and friends. We have lost our homes and livelihoods, and that is always the topic that they want me to talk about. They want me to talk about the sad part of my story, but not the part that I am lobbying with the government, not the part that I am trying to make change happen by changing policies, amending policies in my own home country. So that is the gap that I am seeing. It is like trying to make the youth as a decorative, a decoration to an event, just to say that they are actually listening to us, but we are not even part of the decision-making processes where the change is actually happening. So yes, there is a momentum of the youth, but sometimes they are not taken into, and our demands are not really taken into consideration that would enable us to really put in the decision-making table.
So to wrap, I'm going to do one last round around the table, or the virtual table, if that's what you want to call it. And this is the question, right? We come to this youth forum at a time where there are cross-cutting crises facing the world, be it climate change, be it the COVID-19 pandemic, being it growing uncertainty around that, the shocks that we are now experiencing in terms of food security, energy security, the right to life in places like Ukraine and other conflict zones around the world. So there's a lot facing this moment as we launch this youth forum. What DSG is the most important people should be focusing on right now, particularly in the forum that we're starting today?
I think it's really important to articulate the voices and connect them to the choices that you'd like to make. The last speaker was talking about the advocacy and being thought of as tokenism, but your advocacy changed the policy for the bank that they would take 50% of their resources on climate to adaptation, so that was not token. And I think you have to be very clear about what your expectations are of what you do when you go to advocate, to say you want to be in decision making. What does that really look like? But please never ever think that young people's voices are just token. A lot of the voices we heard at COP26 did make a difference and have changed some of the policy. But perhaps what we're not doing is communicating that as well. So I think it's more important for us to engage in what each other's expectations are and to explain it. We have an idea of what we say young people should expect, but we also need to listen to what their expectations are. Be clear about that. What is your expectation of decision making? Where do you want to see yourself in decision making? And think it through, because it means that to an extent you have to be doing. That takes you out of the space where you are advocating. So choices, that you will have to make as a result of your voices, and to make that much clearer.
And I think you also have to be realistic, right? Jayatma, let's bring you in. Same question, 20 seconds.
I think we should stop reinventing the wheel. We do have the frameworks, we do have the platforms that we need, the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and we now have the Our Common Agenda to really put pressure under both of those to get us where we need to be at 2030. So let's get into action. Let's not negotiate anymore. Let's not come up with outcome declarations and negotiations anymore. Let's just get into action, implement what we have agreed as a global international community on sustainable development and climate.
Chido, do you agree? We've got the SDGs, we've got the AU's agendas at 2060. I mean, your thoughts, 20 seconds.
I agree as well with that. I think it's time that we move to action and that we measure as well as we move to that action. If we're looking at 2030, but how do we measure and how do we ensure that the expectations are met and that they're fully understood from both angles? We look at young people and those in decision making.
Marinelle, if you ever felt like a token, you're not a token today, you get the last word.
Thank you for actually giving us the platform. And yes, there are actually platforms, and I just hope that there are more grassroots climate activists that are being given a platform to actually tell their own stories. So we will be able to put a human face on the climate crisis. And thank you for giving platforms to other activists from developing countries like me. And I'm looking forward to have more platforms for other grassroots climate activists in other vulnerable countries. Thank you.
Well, we'll take your vote of confidence. We thank all our guests for their inputs in this opening segment. DSG, Amina Mohammed, always good to see you. The SG's Youth Envoy, Jayatma Wickramanayake, thank you. AU Youth Envoy, Chido Mpemba, and Climate Justice Advocate Marinelle Ubaldo. All I have left to say is to thank you, the audience, for joining us, and return you now to the safe hands of the ECOSOC President, Ambassador Colin Vixen Kelapile. From the SDG studio, it's goodbye from all of us.
I thank our distinguished guest speakers for their valuable insights, and I also thank you, moderator, for skillfully guiding this very important discussion. The forum will next begin its discussion entitled Setting the Stage, Leaving No One Behind, to be moderated by Ms. Jayatma Wickramanayake, the United Nations Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. The discussion will be followed by a panel discussion on the topic Youth and COVID-19, Building Back Better from Current and Future Crises, to be moderated by Mr. Zubair Junjunia, Global Partnership for Education Young Leader of the United Kingdom. And a second panel discussion on the topic Youth and the SDGs, Achieving the 2030 Agenda with, for, and by youth, to be moderated by Ms. Nafesha Richardson, founder of Spark SVG of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. In between the two panel discussions, the forum will hear a spoken and word performance by Ms. Meera Dasgupta, the 2020 United States Youth Poet Laureate. At the end of the meeting, the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth will provide a wrap-up of the discussions. I now invite Ms. Jayatma Wickramanayake, United Nations Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, to conduct the discussion entitled Setting the Stage, Leaving No One Behind. And I wish you productive deliberations. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Ambassador, for giving me the opportunity. I wanted to also thank and acknowledge our opening panel, which was comprised of women leaders from the Global South, which is still in 2022 can be a rare sight in the UN. So I thank my colleague Chido from the AU, Marinelle from the Philippines, and also the Deputy Secretary General for their time and contributions to that impactful opening remarks. So we have the difficult task of building up or building from that impactful opening segment. And I want in this session to hear from young people, ministers responsible for youth affairs, UN representatives, partners on working with and for youth in building back better from the COVID-19 pandemic and achieving the 2030 agenda. Now, the conversation is not just starting today. The conversation has been going on for a few weeks now on social media, where more than 3,500 young people have added their voices to the 2022 ECOSOC Youth Forum discussions. I want to quote one young person who sent us their inputs, Rhoda Amadou from Ghana. And Rhoda said that what we want is for the youth to be recognized as equally powerful agents of change, and the power structures that prevent our participation in leadership and politics must be changed. Our voices must be heard on subjects that matter. We agree with you, Aroda, and thank you to you and the many other young people who contributed to these discussions online and continue to do so throughout these 2 days. Now, to kick off this session, I want to pass the floor to the High Commissioner for Human Rights, who will share reflections on how young people have been impacted by the pandemic from a human rights point of view, as well as concrete suggestions on ensuring a human rights-based approach to building back better while leaving no one behind. Let me now give the floor to the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the UN, Michelle Bachelet.
Greetings. It is my pleasure to address you today. Youth activism has been pushing the world forward. It is inspiring to see young people challenging discrimination, injustice, and inequalities. From the streets of every corner of the world to the online arena, we have seen powerful demonstrations of youth commitment to equality, climate action, and human rights. Young people are influencing debates on national and international importance and prompting social change, including by demanding a seat at the table and holding governments and businesses to account for their inaction. Last year, in a breakthrough moment for environmental justice, the Human Rights Council recognized that what youth had been saying for a long time, that a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a human right. My office will honor your activism by supporting countries to promote and protect this right, which is crucial to meeting a number of sustainable development goals. The vision and courage of youth are all the more vital given the impact the COVID-19 pandemic has had on them, including in terms of access to education, employment, and health. Globally, 1 in 8 students were left without any access to education or training, with youth in lower-income countries most affected. And among those still able to study, nearly 2 in every 3 reported having learned less since the pandemic began. The impact on women and girls in particular has been extensive. The closures of schools makes girls and young women more vulnerable to child marriage, early pregnancy, and gender-based violence. Globally, as of early 2021, young people experience an 8.7% decrease in employment. Furthermore, young people who lost their jobs are not finding the education or training opportunities they need to re-enter the market. And the full impact of the pandemic, including lockdown measures, on the mental health of youth is still far from clear. Young people's vision and courage are needed. They are reasons for hope. Youth advocacy and activism has tremendous potential as a force for sustainable recovery and for transformative change. I am convinced this potential can be unlocked through the meaningful participation of young people everywhere in important policy and decision-making spaces, spaces that have been traditionally close to you. Young people's voices and concerns are often unheard, ignored, or undermined due to their age. Establishing and improving participation channels while recognizing the value of young people's voices is an urgent priority. In his call to action for human rights and in our common agenda, Secretary General Antonio Guterres expressed how young people need space to participate in the decisions that will shape their future. This participation is crucial for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and you must feel safe and free from fear when you are included. And yet, the UN's first global report on youth protection in civic space launched last year shows that young people who stand up for human rights face attacks, intimidation, and harassment in many countries. So open spaces for debate and dialogue, online and offline, must be promoted. We must urgently protect human rights defenders at risk, especially young activists who often have less means to protect themselves. Young people are also disproportionately targeted by violence while exercising their rights to hold peaceful assemblies. So the Secretary General has pledged the support of the United Nations to develop national protection mechanisms for human rights defenders and environmental activists, particularly young people, women and girls. My office, together with Education Above All and Silatech, is developing a toolkit on the human rights of young people with a focus on those in situations of vulnerability. We established a youth advisory board of 10 young activists and will be consulting with young people at local and regional levels. We trust the toolkit will empower them to stand up for their human rights. Colleagues and friends, let us focus on what unites us so that we can overcome our many common challenges. I thank you, young people from around the world, for standing up for our planet and for human rights. Your work, your commitment, and your energy are invaluable. I stand with you.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. Now, with those remarks, I want to give the floor to Shivangi Agrawal. Shivangi is a queer and disability rights advocate. They will share their perspectives from personal experience on the importance of leaving no one behind. Shivangi, over to you.
Thank you so much to the Secretary General of Envoy on Youth. Hello, I am so honored to be here representing the voice of my fellow youth. My name is Shivangi. I live in New Delhi, India. I am a queer and disabled activist, consultant, researcher, writer, advisor, and facilitator with an emphasis on advocacy for accessibility, sexuality, gender, policy, arts, and education. In my personal experience of accessing healthcare and approaching healthcare professionals is that if by some rare chance they are disabled friendly, then they are not queer friendly. This is similar to what a lot of my queer and disabled youth siblings have experienced in South Asian countries. The pandemic has made accessing resources even more difficult for us as we are pushed further towards the margins. Our bodies and minds are becoming more invisibilized as we experience far greater isolation and loneliness because of our needs are being ignored during the pandemic. You will not hear a lot about the history of disability or queer rights movement in South Asia. Our histories are often erased and we are still stuck in definition and terminology. The current Indian government has termed people with disability as Divyang, which literally means the divine body. This shows that we are still stuck in the medical and charity models of disability, going completely against the UN Conventions for Rights for Persons with Disabilities. And it is the same with the recent Trans Act of 2019 in India, which medicalizes our identities and our bodies. As youth, we are fighting for self-determination to be able to determine ourselves what disability and queerness means for us, not what the society or the state tells us we should be. As a queer youth myself, I truly believe in the power of spaces made by and for intersectional people with disabilities, and the Youth Coalition for Sexual and Reproductive Rights has really given me that platform to not only be a leader but also form a unique community of meaningful support for various topics including sexual and reproductive health and rights and bodily autonomy. The Youth Coalition has supported us in truly following and practicing the principles of disability justice, which emphasizes intersectionality and community work. Bodily autonomy is one of the most important rights that is taken away from youth from intersectional marginalizations, especially youth who are trans, queer, disabled, poor, lower class, sex workers, HIV positive, dark-skinned, indigenous, or living in the global south. A lot of my queer and disabled siblings often experience lack of autonomy and the power to choose for their own bodies. Usually, caregivers or legal guardians are the ones making important decisions for our people without our considerations or consent. In summary, we need support through equitable and accessible resources and materials for meaningful engagement of intersectionally marginalized youth in decision-making spaces with funds, centering the experiences of youth belonging to unique marginalizations, especially in consideration of how the pandemic has left us further ignored and invisibilized. Supporting and training us as various professionals, doctors, teachers, nurses, care providers, advocates, and social workers so that we can build stronger communities while implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shivangi, sharing those insightful, powerful, and very clear remarks with us. I'm certain that your recommendations on improving the participation opportunities for young people in all their diversity will be very helpful to participants, especially also during the next 2 days of this forum. So without further ado, we will now transition to the first panel discussion of this session to discuss building back better from current and preparing for future crises. Zubair Junjunia, Global Partnership for Education Youth Leader, will be our moderator for this discussion. Zubair, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Jayathna. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Zubair. I am an educational activist and social entrepreneur. I'm the National Youth Leader for the UK at the Global Partnership for Education, as well as the founder of Zenotes, a global student movement that is working to reduce education inequality and has reached over 3.5 million students all over the world. Today, I'll be your moderator for our first panel on youth and COVID-19, building back better from current and future crises. Witnessing it from my educational perspective, I saw how ensuing lockdowns affected the youth globally as education delivery turned remote. But the ones affected most were those in marginalized communities. 3 out of 4 of the 463 million students without access to remote learning were those experiencing poverty or living in rural situations. This is just one example where we need a radical transformation at a systems level, not only to support the current challenges, but future-proof them too. And we must build back better so those that are left behind aren't pushed back even further. With that in mind, I am pleased to introduce you to our panelists for this discussion. Joining us today, we have Her Excellency, Ms. Claudia Placholm, State Secretary for Youth Affairs of Austria. His Excellency, Mr. Hussein Ismail, Minister of State for Youth, Sports and Community Empowerment of the Maldives. Mr. Guillermo Rafael Santiago Rodriguez, Director General of the Mexican Institute of Youth. Ms. Sahar Al-Bazar, President of the Inter-Parliamentary Youth Forum of Young Parliamentarians. Ms. Claudia Sheamus, Liaison Officer for Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights Issues of the International Federation of Medical Students Associations. From Poland, Mr. Ali Faiz, co-founder of Youth Consensus for Peace and Afghanistan, from Afghanistan. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being with us today. And I'd like to kick off with Your Excellency, Mr. Hussein Ismail. Today's young people are disproportionately affected by simultaneous and multifaceted global challenges, including the COVID-19 pandemic, the climate crisis, and rising inequality during ongoing conflicts. It's being referred to as this triple nexus: COVID, climate, and conflict. So, Excellency, as Minister of Youth and Sports of the Maldives, a country that has been viscerally affected by these multi-dimensional compounding challenges, especially the climate crisis and COVID-19, how can the world address these challenges and avoid future ones with and through empowering young people?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Greetings. While the pandemic's path differs from country to country, Maldives have also implemented social distancing, confinement, and social isolation measures to stem the virus spread. COVID-19's impact on mental health, employment, and money losses were top concerns among youth. Young people frequently work in low-wage temporary jobs in areas that have been hit hardest by the crisis. Because of its incredibly rich and diverse marine natural ecology, the Maldives has developed a thriving high-end tourism industry. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to light some challenges in Maldives. Business find it difficult to sell their goods or give services at reasonable prices due to the small size, geographical isolation, and geographically dispersed populations. The same can be said about government services. The shutdown of resorts and hotels during COVID-19 pandemic resulted in massive jobs and income losses, making it difficult for local youths to find work for at least a few years. Social isolation and confinement have substantial psychological effects on young individuals, creating stress, anxiety, and loneliness. Since the beginning of the pandemic, young adults have experienced a higher level of suffering than other age groups. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, online inquiry to violence prevention hotlines have risen, while emergency calls reporting domestic violence against women and children have increased along with the mental health issues. The Maldives is already dealing with several climate-related issues such as rising sea levels, tropical storms and floods. The island's communities' livelihoods and infrastructure have all been impacted by climate change as a result of the rapid rise of tourism and large infrastructure projects. To move the needle ahead, meaningful collaboration and policy effort are required. Similarly, youth have also been active in recovery efforts in collaboration with the government. For instance, a huge number of youths have volunteered for the Emergency Response and Human Protection Agency to improve the measure taken by the government during the pandemic. Several mental health awareness online sessions have been conducted by the ministry. Youth organizations have stepped in quickly to distribute information among their peers and aid in the virus containment. New programs are focused on assisting the elderly and other populations that are at higher risk of infection, as well as combating stigma and discrimination. Some changes that we have brought to government strategies and policies regarding the pandemic include National Emergency Operations Center was to oversee the activities of stakeholder agencies, and National Emergency Preparedness, Readiness and Response Plan for COVID-19 was developed. The government of Maldives activated the emergency plan and decided to grade the COVID emergency into 4 levels nationally. Designated spokesperson was identified by NEOC and press conferences were held daily to ensure access to timely information from government authorities. Activated online platform with chatbots to ease burden or triage personnel in call centers, hotline and physical locations, example flu clinics, hospital, triage team. Support offered to migrant population with the help of the Maldivian Red Crescent and Ministry of Economic Development. Developed a training plan for enhancing professional skill set of health workforce. Some initiatives by the government to reduce socio-economic impact include reduce government current spending by $1 billion $65 million as a precautionary measures to compensate for project economic issues as a fallout of the spread of COVID-19. Developed an economic stimulus package to ensure the continuation of jobs and survival of businesses. Financial aid for Maldivian students abroad for maximum 2 months. Introducing National Apprenticeship Program through National Recovery and Resilience Plan to develop skills among youth. People stood up to the plate when confronted with pandemic's extraordinary social conditions, accepting new working arrangements and personal hardships, and reminding us that the human ability for resilience is astonishing. It's evident that we will only be able to survive if we work together. With great pleasure to represent Maldives, one of the highly developing countries in this forum, I believe that investing and working together with youth of the country will lead to a brighter future. I hope this would be worthwhile to those countries still suffering from the consequences of COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you, Your Excellency. And on the point that you raised, the effects of the policy that the Maldives has seen and if is impacting its community, I'd like to come to you, Your Excellency, Ms. Claudia Placon. In the face of urgent crises, sometimes budgets and priorities shift to accommodate response efforts. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted how often youth-related agendas are the ones most heavily impacted. For example, there's now $148 billion impact annual financing gap in middle and low income countries to achieve quality education for all by 2030. The pandemic has reversed years of socioeconomic progress. So building back forward, how can we ensure that critical services, basic needs, and the fundamental rights of young people are not the ones to suffer first? How can we ensure that the development of resilient policies can take into account young people's rights and needs?
Thank you very much, dear Excellencies, dear youth delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you today about the challenges that young people currently face and how we as members of government can adequately support and encourage youth in mastering these challenges. First of all, I want to state that almost all policies concern youth policy. This is because every decision which is made affects the youth the longest, and there cannot be any decisions without having the effects on youth on our mind. Being young is a challenging phase of life itself, and the COVID-19 pandemic has not made it any easier. The last 2 years have been very challenging for young people, and they definitely had to sacrifice a lot. These past 2 years were marked by uncertainty and insecurity on what the next weeks or months may bring. And for the health of vulnerable groups, the young in particular have given up a lot, including many occasions and also events that usually play a major role in the process of growing up. To fully recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, it is highly necessary to now focus on the needs of the young generation. Even more, we should actively include young people in decision-making in the whole process. And I'm more happy that the European Commission has named 2022 as the European Year of Youth, as this is the right sign to young people on our continent that they are neither forgotten nor a so-called lost generation. In fact, they are the present and the future of our countries. As one part of the question of today's panel is how we can ensure that policies take into account young people's views, I'd like to state how we in Austria try to manage that. I'm very proud that putting young people's needs and expertise in the center of policy making has already been a long tradition here. Therefore, Austria 10 years ago implemented a so-called youth check on any law passed on a national level. In concrete terms, this means that each ministry has to follow a standard protocol when preparing draft legislation where the effects on children and young adults have to be checked. And I would also like to see such a legislative check on a European level. And we're working on that within the Conference on the Future of the European Union. And another way to strengthen young people's voices is, of course, to grant them the right to vote. Austria did so 15 years ago by lowering the voting age from 18 to 16. It has been showing us that young people are willing and also able to participate just as effectively and responsibly as older voters. And as a result, politicians are now more likely to focus on children and youth issues, as they expect in return to receive more engagement and votes. Let's take the momentum after this crisis to be even more active in advocating for youth and prioritizing their needs at all times. And let's be clear about one thing, that we can't do anything without young people. Young people are ready to accept political responsibility, and we, the young people, are ready to shape our own future. And finally, I'd like to emphasize how important I consider the exchange within the ECOSOC Youth Forum. By sharing best practice examples, all of us can benefit and achieve the best quality of life for young people. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I hope that in 2022, the year of the youth in Europe, I hope the Austrians can champion the youth check so that it is a legislation that is across Europe. I would like to turn to you next, Ms. Sahar Al-Bazar. As the president of the Interparliamentary Union Forum of Young Parliamentarians, what can parliaments do to build back better with and for youth from the current and future crises, including COVID-19?
Thank you so much. Mr. Moderator, fellow panelists, Your Excellencies, youth from all over the world, I'm so delighted to be with you today, and thank you for the question. I want to start by introducing what's IPU and what is the Forum of Young MPs for those who don't know. The IPU is the World Organization for Parliaments. Our 178 member parliaments represents over 6 billion people around the world. And our Forum of Young MPs is a permanent body of the IPU and the meeting place of world's young MPs. As the president of this forum, my answer is that parliaments can and must play a key role, as they are the institutions that represent people, make laws, and monitor governments. Parliaments are built to build the bridge between people and public policy, to make it more effective. The more voices we have, the better our decisions will be. And in our global context, we have a little margin of error, because in most important decade of the human history between global pandemic and the climate change, the choices we make and the decisions we take today will affect the future of our planet and humanity as a whole. Those who will be most affected are the young people and the future generations who are left out. Today, only 2.6% of the world's MPs are under 30 years old. Having said that, to mobilize an action to address this youth underrepresentation in parliaments, the IPU launched a campaign called I Say Yes to Youth in Parliament. And I want to seize this opportunity to thank UN leaders like the Envoy of Youth and the High Commissioner of Human Rights and many more who signed up for this campaign. The actions that this campaign called for included promoting youth quotas, lowering the age of eligibility for political offices, and mentoring young aspirants to political offices. And I would like also to share here the Egyptian experience, as this year we had a very high percentage of youth representation in the parliament in the history of the Egyptian parliament. We are currently 20% under the age of 45. We also have our majority leader. His age now is 37 years old, and it never happened before. We also run simulations for the parliament in governmental universities across governorates, so we can engage more youth and promote for engagement in political life. Back to the Young Forum and our efforts as young MPs globally, we had a lot of thought and sharing in the global conference that we had previously. And we came out with callings for governments to do certain things that we think it's very important for youth. First, overseeing budgets so countries meet UNESCO's targets of 6% GDP on education, ensuring free and universal access to education for all, prioritizing education that strengthens futuristic skills, establishing national digitization programs, making universal health care for everyone a reality, increasing investment for youth, employment, access to credit, and social security. Dear colleagues, young people are key to build back better, stronger, and more sustainable world. And parliaments are a key to bringing youth-led solutions to the decision-making tables. I hope you will join us in unlocking the power of having more youth in parliament. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your message, Ms. Alvazar. It actually goes back to something the Deputy Secretary General said about young people and how we hold our leaders accountable. And in fact, the young parliamentarian groups are very, very powerful vehicles to do exactly that. Our efforts to build back better are crucial in stopping the perpetuation of crises. And while policies are the foundation that can help set course in the right direction, actions on the ground are equally important. And Claudia, I'd like to turn to you as a medical student and member of the IFMSA. You've been contributing to addressing and mitigate some of the current crises at the front line. From a student perspective, how can we build better synergies between policies and frontline mobilization?
Thank you for your question. So from the perspective of the IFMSA, meaningful dialogue with civil society is crucial to achieving this interaction. In the IFMSA, we strengthen the capacity of our members so that they are more prepared for the national work, whether it is advocacy or building social awareness, as both are important components of this dialogue. When the pandemic had started, we launched the library with resources where our members could find evidence-based connections between, for example, COVID and gender. We cooperated with UNFPA to create informatory videos targeting young people, as at the beginning, actions towards youth were scarce and we felt left alone, that it impacted our physical and mental health. Throughout the pandemic, our members participated in a series of webinars that emphasized the role of COVID-19 on different global health issues. As a youth, we took actions ourselves from what we saw lacking in the response. Such comprehensive and multifocal approach helped our members to shape their national responses in addressing the needs of multiple social groups, especially those left behind. This synergy between diverse groups within the society and their inclusions in the response mechanism as active agents, but also as beneficiaries, is crucial to establishing meaningful and impactful action. This can be achieved by having a dialogue with civil society to listen to the needs, their expertise, and the struggles. So many issues would have been avoided if policymakers had listened to youth from the front lines of social movements. For example, from my own field of work, which is sexual and reproductive health and rights, listening to youth working on reducing barriers in accessing SRHR services or addressing growing cases of violence against women during the pandemic would result in the lesser impact of the pandemic on those issues. Lack of dialogue is also prominent not only in this crisis, in the pandemic management, but also in other lurking crises, such as climate change. In the recently concluded Commission on the Status of Women, we could notice the exclusion of youth and non-governmental organizations in many strategies proposed by member states. That resulted in actions being superficial or just mitigating the consequences for those who are already privileged. In the IFMSA policies, we reflect on the effect of the pandemic and climate change on different health issues. In recently adopted policies, we included in consequences on harmful traditional practices or delivery of comprehensive sexuality education. Always having in mind the tremendous impact of the pandemic on social determinants of health in our advocacy efforts. So just to conclude the final call, the intersectional approach achieved by social dialogue is the key to successfully implementing policies and thus mobilizing multiple groups at the forefront of the crisis response. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia. I particularly picked up on your words of transitioning from beneficiaries to active agents, becoming problem owners rather than problem solvers is critical. And I would like to talk about how the importance of inequalities to be addressed front and center with Mr. Rodriguez as Director General of the Mexican Institute of Youth. Can you share best practices from your country of how putting equality at the center of your effort has led to the acceleration of progress?
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenos días a todos y a todas.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings from Mexico. Special greetings to those that have made this possible, this ECOSOC Youth Forum. A special greeting to the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. For the government of Mexico, it is extremely important and necessary to pay attention to youth so that they can also achieve sustainable equality. 89% is the increase that has been seen by the Mexican government so that we can be able to achieve more than $2 million. And one of the actions that has been carried out to achieve the said goals. I'd also like to share with you that most of the public policies in Mexico today are geared towards the youth, putting them at the center, giving them training and seeing them as protagonists that cannot be done away with for regeneration and transformation of our country. I also would like to tell you that one of the governments that has been taken up is Youth Building the Future, and 56% of their beneficiaries are women. This is a goal for gender equality which cannot be overstated. In the Institute for Youth, we also have taken up programs to ensure our support to the youth, and this is a free program online open to all youth in the country. More than 68% of the people who have been supported in this program are youth who are women. We also have a National Day for Youth Volunteering so that we can contribute to Agenda 2030. And it is very important because we cannot continue with a lost decade. And through this day, we have been able to reach many young people, especially those in the marginalized areas and people who live in areas of high inequality. We also have a national project for adolescents around the country. And the main goal of this program is to give reproductive and sexual education in a timely manner and ensuring that it's accessible to all young people in the country to ensure that the life that the youth are able to carry out in the future is based on decisions that are well informed. This is a question that should ensure that they are not limited in any way in enjoying their rights. And one last program, which is very important, and we are convinced that this is an important job for us as we work as a team, is understanding the structural problems that the youth are facing and how we can bridge these gaps. It is not possible to bridge inequality gaps without working together with the youth. There is no vertical approach towards this. This is a horizontal approach, working as a team, shoulder with shoulder, working together. Because the youth, both young and women, are an important part in the development of our country. I'm happy to be here with you, and we in Mexico continue to fight for the well-being of all youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We've now heard about the importance of building synergies and ensuring coherence, but in many places around the world, and particularly in fragile and conflict-affected areas, it takes so much more than policies and programs at the local level to truly address the impact of current and future crises. It also takes multilateral solidarity and global cooperation. Ali, from your perspective as a young peace builder from Afghanistan, what are your recommendations to ensure that no one is left behind and when responding to current and future challenges?
Thank you, Zubair, for asking this important question. I would like to also thank the organizers of this timely event. I'm really sad because of the attack and explosion of today in Kabul that targeted the school students and took the life of more than 20 students. And also, I'm sad because of the all war victims around the world. In response to your question, I would like to talk about the pandemic, that how pandemic as a global issue has impacted all of us, and how as a young people we could tackle these issues. We know that we are living in an extremely globalized world, and we are more connected than ever a time in the past. This connectedness brings us together and ties our present and future path together. More than any time in the history, the world affairs now can affect us positively or negatively. This pandemic is a living proof that we can equally be vulnerable to the spark of any crisis in any part of the world. It's also a lesson learned that we are together in our sadness and happiness, in our miseries, and we can also be together in our growth and development. It's also time for us that we should find common solutions to overcome these challenges. In responding to the COVID-19 recovery, it requires for more inclusive decisions, collective actions, building synergies, collaboration, and partnership. That's why it's important that we must follow common ground approaches instead of adversarial approaches, inclusion instead of exclusion, valuing human life equally regardless of the skin of their colors or eyes, whether is it Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, or Ukraine. It is us that suffer. Today, I think we are dealing with 4 existential threats and challenges, which are the atrocities of war, the pandemic, poverty, and also climate change. That we are standing in these critical moments of our history, that if we don't take the right decision today and act collectively to resolve these challenges, we will face with a global chaos, and that will be a big challenge for all of us. I want to conclude with some specific policy recommendations for all of us that we could utilize them when we are planning or when we are acting for implementation of the 2030 agenda and also responding to the COVID-19 recovery. Number one, we have to change our mindset. We have to utilize and practice the principles of think globally and act globally, or also maybe we can call it act globally or act locally in our planning and achieving the 2030 agenda. So it's very important that we have to think the whole world as a society, because we can be impacted equally by these pandemics and the challenges that I have just mentioned. I want to also lend a term from the General Romeo in Doha conference a few months back, that we are a generation of without borders. So that can be our impact. This is the way that we have to think broadly when responding to these challenges. So just changing our mindset is not enough. We have to also change our approaches when dealing with this crisis. We should utilize a whole of society and even go further, utilize a whole of world approaches in our program and in our programming and also planning to achieve and operationalize the 2030 agenda and dealing with the current global issues that we are dealing with. And finally, I want to talk about this, that our future is the future of the world. We are common in our miseries, as I've already mentioned, and our prosperity and growth. These notions are common and collective, and the true realization of them depends on our partnership, collaboration, and supporting each other. So thank you, Zubair, and everyone.
Thank you very much, Ali, and thank you to all our speakers. I'd just like to end this panel with the 3 words which resonated most with me during the discussions: empowerment, inclusion, and accountability. And with that, I'd like to pass along and introduce Mira Dasgupta, the 2020 United States Youth Poet Laureate. Mira is the youngest and first Asian American Youth Poet Laureate of the United States. She's born in Queens, New York. She's a fierce advocate for climate action and gender equality. Mira will be performing her poem, One Small Step. Over to you, Mira.
One small step. When Neil Armstrong first landed on the moon, and Earth existed eternal at the center of its orbit, a blue breath of air subsisting between a spray of stars. It was the hearth of home. Histories unfurled in the wear of space, a people who dared to dream, which paved the way for one small step to change the world. We now know that this blip of a body, sleepy shores beset in bedtime stories, is more than a humble abode, but a place, a loved one who is worth fighting for. So to you, I first ask to step into each other's shoes. Be the girl whose summer days are hampered by habitual hurricanes, the son whose lungs have survived the smoke, the pollutants every day, a child who had to be carried away from the whiplash of wildfires, an uncle who noticed the fish leaving, ecosystems weeping, the situation becoming increasingly dire. One small step begins with us, our willingness to water the movements which we sow, to conserve the ocean and the land, to save all that we know. This is not just protection, but a resurrection, to give back to those who have just learned how to crawl, to use our voices and vision to restore and ensure a future for not only this generation, but a future for all. Because without gravity, one small step is a synonym for soaring, and falling is an opportunity to fly. If everyone takes one small step, every ripple of feet has the potential to become a wave. Every wave a part of the sea, a part of us, a testament to not only our potential today, but that of what it could be. So step, step, step. And do not be afraid to grapple with climate change. Though the issue towers above, you do not climb the brick alone. Look around and see the faces of those beside you. Look down from the vantage point of the moon at this perfect planet, the possibilities anew. Because though we must now acknowledge our differences, we cannot let them divide us. It is in cooperation that we can move the mountains which we have made to find sustainable ways to repay what has sustained us, to finally face the height, that this home is our destiny, that this is a new chapter within our collective histories, that Earth is ours to save. Thank you.
That Earth is ours to save. Such powerful words. Thank you for allowing us to hear and connect with your artistry, Mira. With that, I will now pass the virtual mic to Nafisha Richardson, founder of Spark SVG, who will be leading us through the second panel on youth and the SDGs. Nafisha, over to you.
Thank you, Zubair. My name is Nafisha Richardson, and I come from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I'm the founder of Spark SVG, a youth organization which aims to ignite positive change in our communities. And I have the pleasure of being the moderator for the next panel on the youth and the SDGs, achieving the 2030 agenda with, for, and by youth. Now, in 2015, the world came together and in a historic display of international cooperation and solidarity, adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And in this roadmap for action, a set of 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, were outlined, which need to be achieved in order to ensure that we build a more sustainable, just, equal, and peaceful world for all, leaving no one behind. And now fast forward to today, 19th of April, 2022, we have less than 8 years to reach the global goals. And the truth is that we are nowhere near reaching our goal. We need urgent action and to move from talk to delivery, bring people in all of their diversity together to accelerate SDG implementation. And so with that in mind, I'm pleased to introduce to you our panelists for this discussion. Joining us today, we have His Excellency, Mr. Bakari Baji, Minister of Youth and Sports from the Gambia, Her Excellency Jofia Rats, Deputy State Secretary for Youth, Office of the Prime Minister of Hungary, who is accompanied by Mr. Demosh Kavash, UN Youth Delegate for Hungary. We also have His Excellency Mr. Ashraf Sobi, Minister of Youth and Sports for the Arab Republic of Egypt. We have Mr. Max Trejo, Secretary General of the Ibero-American Youth Organization, Ms. Selma Bishbish, Youth Climate Activist from Algeria, and we also have Ms. Yershel Rodriguez Rizal, Climate Activist from Colombia. And just listening to that lineup, I am sure that we are all in for a wonderful discussion. And I welcome everyone who is here today and thank you so much for being with us. And with that, let's dive right in. So Yershel, let me start with you. As an Indigenous youth rights activist, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities that we have to achieve the SDGs by 2030?
Thank you, Nafisha. First, I am very honored to be able to speak in this space. And for me, it's important because I consider myself bringing the voice of the unheard, of the youth, of the indigenous communities, of the Black people, of the all these frontline voices. I am an environmental engineer, climate activist, researcher of the National University of Colombia, but I'm also, like you said, I am a racial indigenous Afro-Caribbean woman from the archipelago of San Andres, Providencia, and Santa Catalina Islands, located in the Caribbean Sea of Colombia. And well, diving in about the Sustainable Development Goals, or known as the Global Goals, we know that it was a call for action to end poverty, to protect the planet, and to ensure that by 2030, all people would enjoy peace and prosperity. But just as you said, with the latest report, it makes clear that the world is really not on track on achieving this by this time. And even before the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak, we have seen this progress really spotty in our developing countries and like island nation or the frontliners of climate change, because we can see like in many cases the progress have been reversed. Like I said before, I am part of the racial indigenous group, and that for more than 300 years, we have lived in this small archipelago of the Caribbean seas, being the guardians of the seafloor biosphere reserve declared by the UNESCO as one of the most important ecosystems for the health and the sustenance of our planet, because we're the home of the third greatest coral barrier reef in the planet. So it is just like this major thing we have on us to protect our community and our ancestral ways of living. In the recent years, we have been really facing the intensity of climate change. And in less than 15 years, we have faced two major hurricanes, the last one being in November 2020, destroying the 98% of what I have known my entire life as my island, and also damaging incredibly the ecosystems and making all of us become climate displaced. So for us as, or for me as a youth indigenous activist, as a frontliner, like I like to say, the biggest challenges we face achieving the SDGs, I want to break them down like in four for now. The first one for me is representation. It, for me, is one of the most and the greatest challenge we have, because we as the vulnerable ones, of the ones in the front line that facing all these changes, the youth, the indigenous communities, the Black people, the local communities, the peasants, and a lot more are not being represented on the discussion tables. We're not taking accountable in decision making or in policy creation about our own future, you know, and neither does the other creatures and the other cycles that we cohabitate with in this planet. And other challenges facing the instability and the insecurity, such as the conflicts we have between nations. We can see it like worldwide. In my racial community, we have been facing the loss of our ancestral sea space because the conflict between Nicaragua and Colombia, and who should draw their line much further, and not taking in consideration an entire culture and an entire way of living that is going on in that part of the sea territory. And the implementation of these programs in the local context, for me, is one of the greatest challenges, because we have like all these spaces we talk in the global scale, but when we go to the local scale, is not being implemented because it's really difficult to get all these action in the local level. And to close this part, the governance, we really struggle with the political will to transform these developing programs into really sustainable long-term practice. You know, in our countries, they are more worried about being part of the exponential growth and not really understanding the means of what is to inhabit and cohabitate this beautiful planet. Our governments condone ecocide, condone a lot of things that are not in the path of living in harmony with our planet. And but the future is ours as young people, and I want to bring like this voice of hope in this space, because we are doing stuff, you know. That's what I can take away from being a young person. We are in the way of doing stuff. We don't just talk, we do stuff. And we're finding ways of you to overcome these hardships around the world, building and creating opportunities to achieve these SDGs. Just here in Colombia, in 2018, 25 children and youth, I am part of this group, we filed the first lawsuit in Latin America addressing the effects of climate change on the future generation, and they called Tutela Amazonia, where we held our country and our president accountable for not complying the Paris Agreement and having the Amazon rainforest destroyed and contributing to climate change. And we won that lawsuit as youth. And now we're working on developing an intergenerational pact for the life of the of our Amazonic ecosystem, to assure the life of this important ecosystem and this important ally to face climate change. And in our island, we're working on the marine ecosystems restoration with programs like Corales de Paz, where it's mainly youth and people and scuba divers from our own community that are being part of all this process. And on the country scale, programs like Klima Labs and organizations like Klima Lab, they are working on local participative adaptation around the country. That is so amazing that we could really start tackling this struggle from the local basis. And once more, thanks.
Thank you
for this space.
I mean, definitely. And, you know, highlighting everything that you're doing and the challenges that you're facing. I'd like to now hear from Your Excellency, Mr. Ashraf Sobhi. You know, despite the challenges, especially those that Yashel would have referenced, young people, especially considering the COVID-19 crisis, young people continue to put themselves as solutions and change makers to help the world achieve its sustainable development goals by 2030. Excellency, can you please share how Egypt invests or supports its young change makers through its program and policies?
This is the third time I'm addressing the speech represented the Arab Republic of Egypt as a Minister of Youth and Sports for the whole youth through this agreed conference for the youth with the United Nations ECOSOC. I'll speak in Arabic. السيدات والسادة الحضور.
Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome all the attendants representing governments and youth who are active in public work as well as international work at this forum, which brings together our sons and daughters throughout the world and puts them here with decision makers so we can listen to them, so we could work on incorporating their ideas in our priorities. We have lived through and continue to live through one of the most difficult periods in recent history as the world faces the effects of the corona pandemic. And this has caused painful human losses as well as deep economic and social effects between the youth. And this has also affected the abilities to deal with the different problems of society. Governments throughout the world continue
to seek to alleviate the burden on their peoples, be they economic or health or psychological or other forms of burdens. And it is important to benefit from the experiences of youth and support them as an urgent priority in our efforts to overcome this international and global challenge. And here, the Egyptian government, with the leadership of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, has sought to support youth and put them in the lead. It has prioritized their issues and their needs in its national action. And this support is one of, and it considers youth as an important demographic in the comprehensive development programs. And the political leadership believes that youth is an important are an important fraction of society, and they represent the important fabric that forms the foundations of society. Egypt continues to strive to achieve Agenda 2030 and integrate youth in the development process, enhancing their role here, as well as incorporating them in the Egyptian strategic vision of 2030. The Egyptian Ministry of Youth and Sports has worked on implementing many programs to build the Egyptian citizen, and it has intensified its programs that work on achieving development, especially SDGs 3, 4, 5, 16, and 17. The ministry also works within the Egypt 2030 vision and implements its strategic goals that are in line with the Egypt 2030 vision. This includes programs that are youth-oriented and sports-oriented, as well as programs for citizenship and political awareness and raising awareness at the cultural and scientific and creative level, and programs to foster healthy living habits through practicing sports and recreational activities in spare time and encouraging group and volunteer work. We also support entrepreneurship, and we support startups and work between private and public sectors, and enhancing job opportunities for youth, keeping in mind all human rights and youth rights in Egyptian society. The Egyptian Ministry of Youth and Sports has also prepared the Egyptian National Strategy for Youth and Adolescents 2022-2027 in cooperation with the UNFPA and the Arab Academy for Science, Technology and Maritime Transport. And this is in line with the UN Strategic Plan for 2030. The Egyptian Strategic Plan is 5 years long, and it comes as an addition to programs to support the development of youth, which has caused Egypt to jump 13 places ahead in the Global Youth Index. In addition, the ministry works on encouraging youth in terms of innovation and creativity and AI, and has transformed educational institutions into creativity and innovation centers. It also works on spreading a culture of self-employment and enhancing capacities to allow the youth to benefit the markets, the labor market. In closing, the economic and social impact of COVID-19 has proven that the world cannot neglect the energy and the power of youth. Therefore, we must not forget the role of youth that confronted the COVID pandemic. We must support youth and supporting youth is important to me at the personal and official level as the Minister of Youth and as head of the Executive Office for the Arab Ministers of Youth. I spare no effort because I believe, and we in Egypt believe, and the Egyptian leadership believes in your role as partners to achieve development. We must not forget the role of sports, a soft power for peace. And peace and sports always lead to harmony in the world and between peoples. Thank you, and peace and God's blessings be upon you. I am Dr. Ashraf Sabhi, Minister of Sports and Youth in Egypt.
Thank you, Excellency. And now over to Excellency Mr. Bakari Baji, Minister of Youth and Sports of the Gambia. How can we harness the potential, innovation, knowledge, and expertise of African youth to bring about positive transformational change in the years that we have left to achieve the SDGs until 2030? And what can governments do to enable this potential?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're grateful to be here and to join our colleagues, ministers, and other young people who are participating in the 2022 ECOSOC Youth Forum. Well, the issue of what we can do, to start with, I'm going to start with what government is doing. The government of the Gambia, with the support of its international partners, have made great strides over the past decades to address the growing population of young people in the country. As the largest sector of our population and the future leaders, the only way for sustainable development of the country is to ensure that young people are provided the needed capacity and the competence relevant for them to deliver in the 21st century and towards the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals and the General Agenda 2030. The government continues to provide the needed investment to build the necessary human capacity and material resources at the Ministry of Youth and Sports and at the Ministry of Higher Education, Research, Science and Technology and its line institutions for better service delivery to our youth sector. The Gambia government will continue to work with young people and provide them with what is needed to excel. We, however, acknowledge the challenges we face in meeting the ever-expanding needs and aspirations of young people, especially in these difficult times of COVID-19. We must, however, work together as government, multilateral and international partners to fulfill our promises to the young people of our countries and those of the world at large. It is the duty that we have as global leaders towards our current young generation and those in the future. It is a duty we must fulfill by putting in place sustainable strategies to recover from COVID-19 and build for a better future. This we must do by ensuring young people are empowered and supported to participate in the decision-making process across the development space. Now, in terms of actions that we believe as a government that must be specific to the issues of addressing from the recovery from COVID-19, primarily we think there is a need for governments across the world, together with the United Nations, to have legislative frameworks that would support young people and their families so that they're able to protect their investments and be able to develop their capacities. Because without development of those capacities, we are going to struggle to find the necessary needs of the young people. Secondly, having a national review of our progress towards achieving the SDGs and ensuring that we take action to have better indicators in our performance. Because in reality, well, it's not a secret that several countries, especially those countries in sub-Saharan Africa, which Gambia is part of, are struggling to fulfill quite a number of the Sustainable Development Goals as they are in the Agenda 2030. And this is not because of a lack of commitment, it's primarily because of the economic situations of these countries and the governance systems that these countries have. So we believe that there is need for countries to reflect internally and look at areas that need improvement, and then so they're doing what is right to support the young people. The third is that changing the education and the work environment to cover for the new realities, because COVID-19 have taught us, all of us, a lot of lessons that there are certain things that we can do without probably being meeting in person, but also realities that probably never came to the fore until when COVID-19 came. So it's important that institutions, government, the international organizations all sit together to look at areas that there is need for improvement, so that maybe we can be able to cut down on the cost and invest some of those resources in areas that are more sustainable to the young people. But finally, we must acknowledge that young people are the future, and they're the present and they're the future. And we cannot be able to move ahead without ensuring that young people are active participants in decisions that we make across our development space, be it at the national level, be it at the legislative level, or be it at the local governance level. This is a reality that all of us must be willing to take, and the older generation must be willing to cede power to the young people so that they can be part of this process. These are some of the areas to sustain support with. And of course, again, want to thank everyone for the time, and hope that the next ECOSOC, all of us will be in person, attending in person. Thank you.
Definitely, and thank you, Excellency. And on the topic that you raised, of recognizing young people as powerful agents of change, I would now like to turn to Her Excellency Ms. Zsófia Ratz, Deputy State Secretary for Youth of the Office of the Prime Minister of Hungary, and Ms. Demarcus Kovács, UN Youth Delegate of Hungary. Now, 2022 is the European Year for Youth. What actions is Hungary taking to use this milestone to advance young people's lives, livelihoods, and futures?
Thank you, Nafisha. I'm honored to speak to all of you on behalf of Hungary at the ECOSOC Youth Forum. Given the ongoing devastating situation in Europe, please let me start with expressing our deeply felt concern about the war in Ukraine, and also let me assure you that Hungary is doing everything we can in our capacity to help and support the people of Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow young people, I was given the chance to speak first at the ECOSOC Youth Forum 4 years ago in 2018 as a UN Youth Delegate. The roles in life and in society are constantly changing, but the goals remain the same until we achieve them. Now, as a Deputy State Secretary for the Youth, I still stand for young people and equality between men and women. Young people have an unpaired vision on our everyday life by knowing how to create, how to change, to invest, and to sustain. We young people are relatives, friends, spouses, parents, but also citizens, activists, experts, leaders, and drivers of positive change. Through the past 2 years, young people have made sacrifices during the pandemic. This is the reason why the cooperation between the generations was efficient despite the everyday problems. The European Year of Youth is recognition for their persistency and solidarity. We are dedicated to create opportunity and offer the chance for young people to participate at international conferences, to show them the institutions where not just the decisions are made about them, but where they have the opportunity to work in the future. We continue to grow on the path that we have started, both to give young people opportunities and empower them. Partnership is essential. We believe that the involvement of umbrella youth organizations is not just helping the participation of young people, but also leads to a chance where they can represent their international vision. That's why we cooperate with the National Youth Council of Hungary as a partner for the European Year of Youth. The Council's dedicated hard work helped us over the past years to reach out to young people, so we are grateful for the next international step of this active cooperation. This year, the European Year of Youth is full of opportunities for young people. To motivate the youth, we have to set good example and find the right connection with them. One of these tools is the UN Youth Delegate Program. What can be better for a partnership than working for the young people with the young people? Now, it's my honor to continue our tradition of giving the floor to our youth delegate. So let me introduce you Domokos, who is going to share his thoughts with you. Thank you for your attention.
Dear fellow youth delegates, ladies and gentlemen, in the past 3 months, I was able to meet more than 1,000 young people across Hungary. And at one school visit, a 12-year-old young student told me, it is important to have good measurements so we can show what we achieved and people around us can see what we are working for. What are our goals and how we can see and say that we are successful? Through my non-formal education project, where I visit schools and help them to organize the selective waste collection, I met a lot of determined young people. They are successful and they can solve complex challenges on local level and contribute to the circular economy approach. Organizing a 4-day conference about the importance of multilingualism and the linguistic minorities, the youth delegates of Croatia, Poland, Slovakia, and Romania were able to visit the schools of the minorities of their homeland countries in Hungary. They educated and consulted with the students in their mother tongue. This visit showed me also that the cultural and educational life of national and linguistic minorities must be protected, and I am glad that in Hungary it is a priority. I can conclude with the support of the Hungarian government and the National Youth Council of Hungary. This conference was able to realize the request of the last UNESCO Youth Forum to create a network of young people to promote multilingual mother tongue-based education. I am thankful to be able to incorporate the VIF part of our event today as a youth delegate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And with that in mind, I would like to turn to Mr. Max Tsebeho, Secretary General of the International Youth Organization for Ibero-America. How can we leverage partnership, solidarity, and collaboration to achieve the SDGs by 2030? And what role can civil society, including youth-led and youth-focused organizations, play in that endeavor?
Qué alegría participar nuevamente con Naciones Unidas en este ECOSOC.
It's a great pleasure to participate once more in this ECOSOC session, where we recognize the work that has been carried out and the work that has been done towards Agenda 2030, calling us all to action, public and private actors. As many countries have said, there are many challenges that lay ahead of us. COVID has affected all of us. Let us not forget wars and climate challenges. But what we need now are solutions to deal with the gaps, the governance, climatic, and youth gaps. The new normal is an opportunity for us to work better, to move towards action in a common agenda in this decisive decade. And this is through the involvement of young people in decision-making, including them as protagonists in decision-making, looking at the solutions, as has been said by Colombia, as agents of change, recognizing them as actors, as people who have a political part to play in the social transformation, placing young people at the very center of the solution. And we need to ask ourselves how we as international organizations need to move forward, bringing together the 21 Ibero-American countries towards this, our work with these 21 countries in this decisive decade. And let us speak less and act more, and work together as with our partners in the European Union to move towards rights and giving them the ability to act. If we look at the rights, the recognition of rights as reflected in the only universal treaty of the youth, which has been ratified in different Latin American countries, which calls for the rights to move towards a culture of equality, a transition that is based on human rights, more democratization of digitalization, and also a lot of working together. And not only look at the rights, but also look at the abilities, especially the social and emotional abilities that are needed, and also in the digital abilities. Because there is an opportunity today in the challenges that we see due to COVID-19. We have an historic opportunity if we equip this digital age so that we have digital solutions. It's only through this that we will be able to have digital abilities to allow youth and young people not only to be the solution seekers, but also the people that bring a new age. And this is a wonderful opportunity for us. And we are convinced that this new opportunity is an opportunity that has to be taken on for us to be actors. As international organization, we are calling for the inclusion of young people in private and public solutions. We are calling for more competition, and a competition that leads to cooperation, so that we are able to duplicate solutions to bridge gaps, the environmental gaps, the digital gaps, the governance gaps, and other gaps that exist, so that we have actions and solutions that will allow young people to take the position not only as solution makers, but as protagonists for social solutions and a digital solution that is needed in this decisive decade, a decisive decade of our common agenda as our Agenda 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And with that in mind, we'll now have our last speaker, Selma, last but not least. You are a social and climate youth activist who has taken part in many programs and organizations seeking change and serving the SDGs. What is your perspective on the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report, and particularly the need to strengthen solidarity with the world's young people and future generations to achieve the SDGs?
First of all, I would love to say thank you so much for the invitation. I wish Ramadan Kareem for everyone, for every single Muslim who is present in here. I was invited as the youngest panelist in here, and I really do thank you for this. Talking about the solidarity that we can have with activists and youth from all over the world, I would say we are already doing this. In fact, I am already collaborating with them. I remember when we had wildfires in Algeria, we started a campaign about supporting the Algerians since we had so many loss, and it was like for the first time experiencing such a tragedy. And we had received their support. All the delegates of the pre-COP26 who were with me, they were there with me in the campaign supporting the Algerian loss, and also in Tunisia as well. Also during Climate Week, we had people from the Asia Pacific and Europe, and they were saying that we are here to support you. And next time in the the regional Climate Week conferences, we can go there and support them back in there. So you can see that this support is something that we are doing as climate activists, since we are all trying to advocate for one challenge, one global concern that is affecting our regions and setting an impact on it. We just want to have a future where youth will no longer be used for the media or to fill the back seats, while we're capable of taking the front seats as and addressing the voice of the inherent ones, like the voice of youth in wars who are unable of turning their ideas into real actions just because they want to make some change in their countries. And this is something that we have highlighted during the MENA Youth Environmental Assembly that I organized, where we had young activists and climate activists presented there, and they were talking about how they're struggling in taking actions just because of having war in their countries. This is something that we need to consider for the upcoming generations. There are some countries where activist presence is not valued. I was the organizer, as I told you, of the MENA Youth Environmental Assembly, and it made me realize that we do have passionate young leaders and change makers who are more into actions than words. Well, I'm talking about brilliant ideas and green projects that are lacking funding to contribute in creating an eco-friendly, sustainable future until our MENA Youth Environmental Assembly was organized, and then we tried to fund them. So you can see that we are the funders, we are the supporters, we are helping each other and supporting each other. We're trying to be even we're trying to make decisions and contribute and leading our countries, trying to lead in the present before the future. Everyone is saying that we have been listened to, but barely seen any actions on the ground after every discussion we make. I truly agree with that. But also I want to add that there are some countries from my region, as an example, and I'm sure in other regions too, where youth voice is never welcomed, where their insights, recommendations, and ideas that can set some improvements in the regions are never taken into consideration. And this should be changed, because we don't want to lead a future where our actions and inputs are neither heard nor given the chance to be addressed. We need support, and we need everyone's trust, because as I always say, trusting us, that's worth it. And if this didn't happen now, then when? Because we are seeing generations coming, and we don't want them to hate what we're doing, but to get more inspired and to do what is better in the future. So yeah, thank you so much one more time for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Selman. I could feel your passion coming through my computer screen. And I was there as well in pre-COP26, and I felt that momentum as well. And that brings us to the end of this panel. Thank you, everyone, for your amazing contributions. And I would now hand back over to Jayathma.
Thank you so much, Nafisha, to you and to Zubair for the wonderful job of guiding us through this insightful discussion. Thanks to all our speakers. Thanks to the audience who've been engaged throughout. This brings us to the end of this session, but the 2022 ECOSOC Youth Forum is only just beginning. In approximately 5 minutes, we will start the virtual networking session, which is co-organized by the 2 youth organizations who were involved in the planning of the ECOSOC Youth Forum, which are the Major Grid for Children and Youth and the International Coordination Meeting of Youth Organizations. So those who are interested in networking, please do join those sessions. And after that, in the afternoon, we will have the thematic breakout sessions on SDG 4, on quality education, SDG 5, on gender equality, SDG 14 on life below water, and SDG 14 on life below water, and SDG 15 on life on land. These sessions are co-organized by the UN system and with youth organizations. So make sure to check your emails, the ECOSOC Youth Forum website, and the social media channels of UN Youth Envoy, so you don't miss out the links and the information about these thematic breakout sessions where you can give concrete inputs to these thematic conversations that will happen during the rest of the day. Thank you very much for joining us once again, and I wish you all the best for the upcoming conversations.